The air in the grand clearing buzzed with a mix of magic and anticipation, carrying the scent of ancient pine, damp earth, and the metallic tang of shifting wolves. Adira, an omega of the Silverpelt pack, stood near the back, her place as the lowest-ranking member. Her hands nervously twisted the rough fabric of her simple linen dress. Tonight was the moon ceremony, her 18th birthday, and the night her life was supposed to change forever. Despite her attempts to calm her racing heart, it pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. For years, the bond between her and Peter, the future alpha, had been a quiet hum beneath her skin, a silver thread connecting them. Their fated mating was the pack's worst-kept secret, a source of whispered envy, and for Adira, a fragile, desperate hope that made being an omega bearable. She glanced toward the front of the clearing where her older sister, Delilah, stood among the elite. Delilah was beautiful, her dark hair gleaming in the moonlight, her laughter loud and confident as she spoke with other ranking warriors. She had always overshadowed Adira, the popular one, the one their parents praised. Adira felt the familiar dull ache of inadequacy, but pushed it down. Tonight, popularity didn't matter, rank didn't matter. Only the moon goddess and the fate she decreed. The pack alpha, Peter's father, raised his hands, and a hush fell over the hundreds of assembled wolves. Tonight, his deep voice boomed, we honor the moon goddess. We honor the bonds she gives us. We secure the future of the Silverpelt pack. A howl rose from the crowd, vibrating deep in her bones. The moon climbed higher, a perfect luminous circle of power, casting the clearing in ethereal silver and black. Adira's breath hitched as she felt the pull, the bond flaring into a tangible rope in her gut, tugging her forward. He was close. Peter stepped into the center of the clearing, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of command that made others bow instinctively. He was everything an alpha should be. He was the man she had dreamed of, the one who would finally see her, the one who would elevate her from nothing to Luna. Peter's eyes scanned the crowd, and Adira's heart stopped. "See me," she prayed, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. But then his gaze landed on Delilah. Adira's stomach dropped as Peter's expression hardened. He turned back to the crowd, his voice ringing out clear and cold. "The bond is broken. I reject this pairing." Gasps rippled through the clearing. Adira's knees buckled, and she stumbled backward, her world crumbling around her. He declared her weak and unsuitable, choosing instead her cruel, ambitious sister, Delilah. Utterly broken, Adira collapsed to the ground. Her collapse was witnessed by a silent, terrifying observer. The legendary Lycan King Michael was present, enraged by the insult to the goddess and intrigued by the scent of the rejected omega. His sharp eyes took in the scene, his jaw tightening with barely contained fury. Adira, unaware of his presence, felt only the crushing weight of rejection and despair. Yet something stirred within her, a flicker of defiance buried deep beneath the pain. As the ceremony continued and the pack celebrated Peter's new choice, Adira retreated to the shadows. Her heart ached, but amidst the shards of her shattered dreams, she found herself wondering if perhaps this was not the end, but the beginning of something else entirely. "Please see me." His gaze moved past the front rows of his admirers, finally locking onto her. He stared, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark under the moonlight. The clearing seemed to grow silent, shrinking until it felt like just the two of them. The pull in her stomach turned into an undeniable force. Then his voice, resonating with the dominance of his alpha blood, cut through the night. Adira, he had called her. He had spoken her name. A dizzying wave of relief and joy washed over her. The whispers around her confirmed it. It was real. This was it. "Come," Peter commanded. Her legs trembling, she obeyed. She pushed past the other Omegas, her head held high for the first time in her life. She walked toward her destiny, her fated mate, her future. So focused on his face, she almost missed the look in his eyes. It wasn't warmth, but cold, sharp, and full of contempt she had never seen before. But she was already moving, already committed. The entire pack's attention fixed on her as she stepped into the center of the clearing. Adira stood frozen in the center of the clearing, a sacrifice offered to an angry god. The silence was absolute. Even the night insects had ceased their chirping. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but the only ones she saw were Peter's. They were as cold and hard as chips of obsidian. The love she thought she'd seen in them for years was a phantom, a story she had told herself. This was the truth. This was the real Peter. "Peter," she whispered, the sound stolen by the heavy night air. Her bond was a live wire, screaming, "Mate, mate, mate," while her instincts screamed danger. He didn't answer. He simply watched her, his expression a mask of bored calculation. From the corner of her eye, Adira was vaguely aware of the guests of honor on the raised granite platform. The pack alpha, Peter's father, sat beside an empty seat with the other visiting dignitaries. It was said a representative of the Lycan King himself was present, a formality for the ceremony of a prominent pack. Adira's humiliation was not just private, it was political. Peter let the silence stretch, wringing every drop of power from it. He let her tremble, let the pack's whispers start to rise. "An Omega," someone hissed. "He can't be serious," another murmured. Peter raised a hand and the whispers died instantly. He looked at her but spoke to the pack, his voice a polished, confident baritone. "We gather under the goddess's eye to secure the future of our pack, a future that must be powerful, a future that must be pure, a future that cannot be built on a mistake of fate." The word mistake hit Adira like a physical slap. The joy and relief that had carried her to the center of the clearing curdled into a cold, sickening dread. "For years," Peter continued, pacing slowly around her, "we have assumed the goddess's will." The weight of his words pressed down on her. Mistake. The bond between them, once sacred, now labeled a flaw to be corrected. Each step he took around her felt deliberate, a predator circling its prey. She wanted to speak, to defend herself or the connection they had shared, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep inside her chest. Peter stopped in front of her, his towering frame casting a shadow over her slight one. For a moment, his gaze softened, and she dared to hope. Maybe this was all a test, a cruel way of proving her worth. But then the coldness returned, sharper than before. "The goddess gives us choices," he said, his tone measured, each word landing like a hammer strike. "And we must choose wisely. Our pack deserves strength, unity, and above all, clarity of purpose." He paused, letting his words sink in. The crowd remained still, hanging on his every syllable. "Fate may have brought us together, Adira, but duty demands I look beyond what was given and seek what is best." Her heart clenched painfully. Best for whom? Not for her. Not for the bond they had nurtured since childhood. She felt exposed, stripped bare before the pack and their judgmental eyes. Every doubt she'd ever had about herself roared back to life, amplified by the collective disdain radiating from those around her. Omegas were meant to serve, to support, to fade into the background unless called upon, but never to stand at the center of something so pivotal. And yet here she was, the unwilling focal point of a spectacle designed to humiliate her. Peter gestured toward the granite platform, where his father leaned forward slightly, watching the scene unfold with an inscrutable expression. Beside him, the empty seat seemed to mock her presence. "Today marks a new beginning," Peter declared, his voice rising with conviction. "A union blessed not only by tradition, but by strategy, by foresight, by power." He turned back to Adira, his eyes glinting dangerously. "You understand, don't you? Sacrifices must be made for the greater good." Sacrifices. The word echoed in her mind, hollow and bitter. Was that all she was now? A relic of a misguided destiny, discarded without hesitation? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. To cry would be to give him exactly what he wanted, proof of her weakness. Instead, she straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet his gaze head-on. If he sought to break her, he would find her unyielding. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But tell me, Peter, what happens when the goddess sees your choice? Will she bless betrayal as easily as she blessed fate?" Her question hung in the air, daring him to respond. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "The goddess understands sacrifice," he replied smoothly. "She rewards those who put the needs of the many above the desires of the few." Adira swallowed hard, the weight of his dismissal pressing down on her. She knew there was no winning this fight, no changing his mind. But as she stood there, surrounded by wolves who viewed her as nothing more than a pawn, she realized something profound. She might have been chosen as a sacrifice, but she would not go quietly. Whatever came next, she vowed to face it with courage, and perhaps, in time, reclaim the pieces of herself he sought to destroy. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the sharp scent of mint and pine clinging to him. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, cruel tone meant only for her, though the entire pack watched with bated breath. "Did you really think?" he sneered, his words cutting through the crisp night air. "That you could be Luna? Did you really think I would bind myself to weakness?" Her breath hitched, and the fragile hope that had been her only shield for 18 years began to crack. She glanced toward his father, the alpha, but he merely observed his son with a guarded expression, offering no intervention. Peter straightened, his face hardening as he turned back to the crowd. Taking a deep, theatrical breath, he puffed his chest, exuding the dominance of his bloodline. The moon hung at its absolute zenith, its white light cascading over him like a spotlight. He was the quintessential image of a future alpha, and he was about to pass his first sentence. His eyes locked onto hers one last time, devoid of any warmth, history, or mercy. "Our future must be strong," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. He pointed a damning finger directly at her. "I reject you. I, Peter, future alpha of the Silver Pelt Pack, do publicly reject you, Adira, as my fated mate." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an emotional wound. It was a searing, blinding pain erupted in her chest as the silver thread of their fated bond, the one she had felt since she was 16, was not merely cut, but torn apart. It felt as though her very soul was being ripped in half. She gasped, a strangled, inhuman sound escaping her lips, and stumbled backward, clutching her chest as the agony brought her to her knees. The pack collectively gasped. This was no simple severing. It was a public execution of a sacred pact. Peter watched her collapse with a look of profound disgust. "The moon goddess was mistaken," he spat, his voice dripping with arrogance. He gestured toward her, now a trembling, weeping heap on the ground. "Our pack cannot be led by weakness. We cannot be represented by this." His sneer echoed in the horrified silence. "She is weak, she is unsuitable, and she is nothing but an omega." The last word was a curse, slicing deeper than any blade. The pain in her chest flared again, white-hot and blinding. She couldn't breathe. The world tilted, the silver moonlight turning sickly and gray. Whispers filled the air as shock gave way to murmurs of agreement. He was the alpha in waiting. His word was law. If he said she was weak, then she was weak. If he claimed the goddess was wrong, then surely he must be right. Her world had shattered. The person who was supposed to be her destiny, her protector, her other half, was the one wielding the knife. Desperate, she looked up through a haze of tears. She met the stone-faced gaze of Peter's father, the alpha who remained impassive. She searched the faces of the pack members she had known her entire life, only to find them averting their eyes, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. She was utterly alone. Peter drank in the sight of her, broken and kneeling before him. A small, satisfied smirk played on his lips. He had done it. He had unburdened himself of his fated duty. But the ceremony was not over. The pack still needed a Luna. "My pack," Peter announced, his voice smooth and confident once more, "deserves a real Luna, a strong Luna, one I have chosen." The pain was still a tidal wave drowning her, but through it, Adira heard his words. Her vision blurred. Chosen. He was turning away from her. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes landing on someone in the front rank among the elite warriors. A triumphant smile lit his face. Adira, on her hands and knees, followed his gaze. He was moving, his purpose clear. He was walking toward the one person she had always loved, always trusted. He was walking toward her sister. Adira's mind, numb and buzzing with the agony of the broken bond, struggled to process what she was seeing. Peter wasn't just walking toward Delilah, he was walking for her. Delilah, her beautiful, popular, perfect older sister, stepped forward from the crowd. There was no surprise on her face, no sisterly concern for Adira, who was still bleeding her soul onto the cold earth of the clearing. Instead, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Delilah's face. It was a look of pure, calculated victory. This was not a surprise. This was a coronation. Peter reached her and, without a word, grabbed Delilah by the waist. He pulled her into a deep, passionate, and possessive kiss, right in front of Adira, right in front of the entire pack. It was a brutal public declaration, a branding. The pack's stunned silence, turned into a new, confused murmur. This was a betrayal beyond reckoning. Peter broke the kiss, but kept Delilah plastered against his side. He lifted her hand, his eyes blazing with pride. "This is your future, Luna," he roared. "Delilah, my chosen mate." For a moment, the pack hesitated. To reject a fated mate was a profound insult to the goddess, but to defy a future alpha was pack suicide. Slowly, a few scattered claps began, then a few more. Within moments, the clearing was filled with a ragged, uncertain, but growing cheer. They were choosing their alpha. They were choosing power over fate. They were choosing Delilah over Adira. The sound of their applause was a second assault. Adira, forgotten on the ground, felt the last of her strength leave her. She looked up, her vision tunneling, her breath coming in shallow, painful rasps. Through the haze of her tears, she saw her sister. Delilah was looking right at her, over Peter's shoulder, as he nuzzled her neck and accepted the pack's adulation. Delilah's eyes met hers. She didn't look away. She held her sister's broken gaze and smirked. It was a small, vicious, knowing expression that said, "You never had a chance. He was always mine." The dual betrayal, her mate, her sister, was a final killing blow. The agony in her chest, the public humiliation, and the crushing weight of that single triumphant smirk overwhelmed her spirit. The world dimmed at the edges as her body, unable to bear even her grief, gave out. Adira collapsed unconscious onto the damp earth. The last sound she registered was the pack cheering for Peter and Delilah. But as her consciousness faded, a new sound pierced through the celebration, a low, resonant growl that vibrated deep within her bones. It was ancient, cold, and saturated with absolute fury. The cheering for the new alpha pair died instantly, frozen in the pack's throats. The air, moments before filled with celebration, grew heavy, cold, and electric with dread. That growl did not belong to a silver-pelt wolf. It was too deep, too old, too suffocating in its power, choking the breath from their lungs. Peter's father, Alpha Borin, had been rising to congratulate his son, a politically necessary but uneasy smile on his face. He froze. "My son has made his choice," he began. But his voice faltered as the growl echoed again, this time seeming to come from everywhere at once. The pressure in the clearing dropped. The silver moonlight dimmed as though a great cloud had passed over the moon. A terrifying, ancient power rolled over the assembly like a physical wave, pressing down on every wolf. It was pure, unadulterated dominance. Omegas and betas were forced to their knees. Warriors, even Peter himself, bowed their heads, their wolves whining in submission. Alpha Borin, too, bent his knee, an act of profound submission on his own territory. This was not the authority of a pack leader. It was the authority of the world. Every eye, wide with terror, turned to the raised granite platform reserved for the guests of honor. A figure emerged from the deep shadows, stepping into the dying moonlight. Silent until now, he had been an observer, a formality. His interference shattered the moment. It was King Michael, the legendary, ruthless Lycan King, ruler of all packs, Alpha of Algos, the last of the ancient bloodline. He was a myth of terror told to disobedient pups, and he was here. Tall and dressed in dark, severe leathers that made no sound, he moved with fluid grace, more predatory than human. His power radiated invisible, suffocating waves, but it was his eyes that held the pack captive. They were not blue, brown, or yellow like those of a normal werewolf. They burned with an unnatural molten gold light. And they were not fixed on Peter, the new Alpha, nor on Delilah, the new Luna. They were not looking at Alpha Boren. Instead, his gaze, blazing with cold, terrifying fury, was locked onto the small, broken form of the rejected Omega lying unconscious in the dirt. The king was enraged. The pack could smell it. It was not the hot, quick anger of a pack dispute, but something far older, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. It was the cold, patient, absolute wrath of an ancient force. It smelled like ozone, blood, and a coming storm. He took one slow, deliberate step off the platform and onto the sacred ground of the clearing. His heavy boot made no sound on the stones. He began to walk, his eyes never leaving Adira. The king was moving. The goddess's insult. King Michael stood over her, a mountain of shadow and power. The pack was so quiet he could hear the frantic pounding of their hearts. They were terrified, as they should be. He had come to the Silver Pelt pack to observe. Their alpha, Boren, had been petitioning him for greater territory, and Michael had come to judge his worthiness, to see how he ran his pack, how he honored the old ways. And this was what he found, a circus, a sacrilege. His golden eyes were fixed on Adira. He could smell the spiritual rot of her broken bond, a scent like ozone and ash, a perfume of profound agony that offended his ancient sensibilities. This was a direct, public, and arrogant insult to the moon goddess. A fated bond was her most sacred gift. To reject it was spitting in her face. To do it with such theatrical cruelty, it was a declaration of hubris that his authority could not ignore. Peter, his foolish bravado evaporating, finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he stammered, his alpha tone cracking under the pressure of the king's dominance. "This is a simple pack matter. She was unsuitable. She is just an Omega." The king's head snapped toward him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Peter. The air temperature in the clearing dropped by 20 degrees. Peter choked on his next word, the air freezing in his lungs. The king's aura flared, a suffocating blanket of pure dominance that forced Peter to his knees. Just an Omega, the words echoed in the king's mind. He had ruled for centuries. He had seen alphas rise and fall. He knew power when he saw it, and he knew arrogance. But as he looked back at the girl, he smelled something else beneath the agony. It was faint, buried deep, but it was there, a scent of winter pine, ancient stone, and a spark of dormant fiery magic. It was a scent that had no business being in a weak Omega. It was a scent that called to him. His rage, which had been a cold, calculated thing, now had a new personal edge. These fools hadn't just insulted the goddess. They had broken something precious. He ignored Peter's pathetic wheezing gasps. He ignored Delilah, who was hiding behind her new mate, her pretty face a mask of terror. He ignored Alpha Boren, who was trembling on his platform. His entire world narrowed to the girl on the ground. In a move that sent a tidal wave of shock through the pack, King Michael, the ruthless Lycan King, knelt in the dirt. He knelt before the rejected Omega. He reached out a single black-gloved hand, his movement slow, deliberate. His fingers, a symbol of so much death and power, hovered over her tear-streaked face. He brushed a matted strand of hair from her cheek. She was cold, lifeless. "They did this to you," he whispered, so low only he could hear. He hooked his gloved hand under her chin, his touch firm. "Look at me." The command was not a request. It carried the weight of an ancient law, bypassing her broken consciousness and speaking directly to her soul. Adira's eyelids fluttered. She was trapped in a black, agonizing void. The pain of Peter's rejection was the only thing that existed. But this voice, it was a new sun burning through the darkness. She was forced to obey. Her eyes, dull, glassy, and swimming with unshed tears, opened. They were empty. She was a shell, her spirit already half gone. Her unfocused, broken gaze drifted up and met his. The world ended. It was not a gentle hum, not a silver thread of fate. It was a cataclysm, a supernova of destiny. The moment her broken blue eyes met his burning gold ones, a bond exploded into existence. A golden, fiery, and furious connection slammed into them both with the force of a physical blow. Adira gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of breath. As the bond, a king's bond, seized her very essence, it unleashed a power so vast it was terrifying. It surged from Michael into her, a tidal wave of ancient strength, and it met a tiny, dormant spark deep within her own soul, fanning it into an inferno. For Adira, the agonizing, tearing pain of Peter's rejection was instantly and utterly incinerated. It was vaporized as if it had never existed. In its place, this new golden power flooded her, mending the tear in her spirit, sealing the wound in her soul. It was warm, absolute, and possessive. For Michael, it was a shock that rocked him to his core. He, who had lived for 1,000 years and long assumed his fated mate was dust, had found her here now, a broken child kneeling in the mud, rejected by a pathetic alpha pup. The scent he detected, pine, stone, and magic. It was her. It was his. His rage, already a mountain, became a volcano. This was not just an insult to the goddess. It was not just the breaking of a pack Omega. This was a direct, personal, and unforgivable assault on his queen. Adira's eyes, which had been empty, suddenly focused. She was no longer looking at a terrifying stranger. She was no longer looking at a king. She was looking at the other half of her own soul. The pain was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only him. Michael's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, twisted into something far more dangerous. He rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his golden eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. He had not just found an injustice. He had found his mate. The power radiating from the king and the Omega was a tangible thing, a crackling golden aura that shimmered in the moonlight, pushing back against the cold. Adira was still on her knees, but she was no longer a heap. The transformation within her was undeniable. Her body straightened, her shoulders squared, though her hands trembled slightly against the damp earth. She felt it now, the bond pulsing between them like a living entity, weaving their souls together with threads of fire and light. It was overwhelming, yet strangely comforting, as though she had been adrift in an endless sea and was finally pulled ashore. Michael took a step back, his movements deliberate, measured, as if even he couldn't fully comprehend what had just transpired. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck taut with tension. He exhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. "You are mine," he said, his voice low and resonant, each word weighted with centuries of authority. It wasn't a declaration, it was a fact, immutable and unyielding. Adira blinked, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality unfolding before her. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat, tangled in the web of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, awe, disbelief, they clashed violently, leaving her breathless. And beneath it all, there was something else, something deeper, recognition. As much as she wanted to deny it, to fight it, she couldn't. Her soul knew him, just as his knew hers. It was primal, instinctual, beyond logic or reason. The air around them seemed to shimmer, charged with energy. The forest, once silent and still, came alive with whispers, leaves rustling, branches creaking, as if nature itself bore witness to the union forged in that moment. Michael extended a hand toward her, his palm open, inviting yet commanding. "Come," he said simply, his tone brooking no argument. Adira hesitated, her gaze flickering between his outstretched hand and his face. His expression was unreadable, a storm masked behind golden eyes that burned brighter than ever. Slowly, tentatively, she placed her trembling hand in his. The contact sent another jolt of energy coursing through her, stronger this time, grounding her in a way she hadn't thought possible. She stumbled forward as he pulled her to her feet, steadying herself against his solid frame. "You will never kneel again," he murmured, his voice softer now, almost tender. Yet there was steel beneath the gentleness, a promise wrapped in velvet, not for anyone. She stared up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Everything about him was overwhelming, his presence, his power, the intensity of his gaze. But there was also a protectiveness in the way he held her, a fierceness that made her feel safe despite the chaos raging inside her. She didn't understand it, didn't know how to process it, but she couldn't deny it either. This man, this king, was tied to her in ways she couldn't begin to unravel. "Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the symphony of the night. Michael's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "I am your beginning and your end," he replied cryptically, "and you are my salvation." Before she could respond, he stepped away, releasing her hand, but keeping his gaze locked on hers. He turned slightly, surveying the clearing where they stood, his posture regal and commanding. The golden aura surrounding them began to fade, retreating into the depths of their bond, but its presence lingered, a quiet hum beneath their skin. "We leave now," he said, glancing back at her. "There is much to discuss, and little time to waste." Adira nodded numbly, unsure of what else to do. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she followed him as he strode toward the edge of the clearing. Every step she took felt surreal, as though she were walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The weight of what had happened pressed down on her, threatening to crush her, but she pushed forward, driven by some invisible force she couldn't name. As they disappeared into the shadows of the forest, the world seemed to shift around them. The trees loomed taller, their gnarled roots twisting across the ground like ancient veins. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the land itself recognized the significance of their passage. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a mournful, haunting sound that echoed through the night. Michael paused briefly, tilting his head as if listening to the call. Then, without a word, he continued onward, his pace steady and unrelenting. Adira trailed behind him, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and doubts. Who was this man? What had just happened to her? And why did she feel as though her entire existence had been rewritten in the span of a single heartbeat? For now, answers eluded her. All she could do was follow, trusting, or perhaps hoping, that the path ahead would lead her to clarity. Her back was straight, her head held high. Her eyes, now clear and sharp, were fixed on Michael. Peter, who had risen to his feet, stared in disbelief. The scent of his broken bond with Adira had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, ancient, possessive aura emanating from her and from the king. "What? What did you do?" Peter stammered, his voice trembling. He instinctively took a step forward. "She was mine. She was—" Michael's head snapped toward Peter, his gaze no longer cold or calculating, but blazing with the promise of death. "She was yours to cherish, protect, honor," he snarled. Slowly, deliberately, he advanced toward Peter and Delilah. They stumbled backward, tripping over each other in their panic. Delilah, who had been smug just moments before, was now pale as the moon above, her face etched with terror that transcended mere pack politics. "You," Michael hissed, his voice low and deadly, vibrating like a threat. He pointed a single black-gloved finger at Peter, echoing the gesture of rejection Peter had used against Adira. "You have rejected your destiny. You have defiled a sacred bond. You cast aside the one chosen for you by the moon goddess." His lips curled into a cruel smile as his gaze shifted to Delilah, who whimpered and tried to shrink behind Peter. "You cast her aside," Michael continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "For ambition, for this worthless, hollow-hearted." He cut himself off, his fury too immense for mere insults. Turning back to Peter, his eyes burned brighter. "And in your arrogance, your blindness, you have delivered her to me." The final words reverberated through the air like a shockwave. Michael moved back to Adira. Without offering his hand, he gripped her arm firmly, pulling her to her seat. With a possessive motion, he hauled her against his side, tucking her small frame close to him in a blatant display of ownership. She stumbled, her legs still weak, but he steadied her, his arm a steel band around her waist. Peter gaped, his mind sluggishly grasping the enormity of his mistake. "No," Peter whispered hoarsely. "You can't. She's an omega. She's nothing." Michael laughed, a short, harsh sound that sent chills down everyone's spines. Looking down at Adira, his golden eyes softened momentarily as they met her stunned yet resolute gaze. Then, turning his head to address the horrified pack, he commanded, "Witness. Witness what becomes of a gift of the goddess when it is claimed by one who is worthy." Peter screamed, a desperate, broken cry. Driven by a surge of jealousy he couldn't comprehend, his alpha instincts finally overrode his fear. "She's mine!" he shouted, lunging forward. But he didn't get far. King Michael didn't even glance at him. Instead, he unleashed his aura, and an invisible wave of power slammed into Peter, hurling him backward as though struck by a falling tree. He hit the ground hard, sliding through the dirt. The impact stole his breath away. She, Michael growled, his eyes blazing with intensity, is everything. His focus shifted back to Adira. She trembled, but not from fear, rather from the overwhelming force of the king's bond surging through her veins. Where Peter's bond had once been a faint whisper, this was a deafening roar. Michael raised his hand, fingers brushing lightly along her jawline, his gaze burning with possession. "They will never hurt you again," he vowed, his voice low and unwavering, more binding than any formal oath. She trusted him completely. Tilting her head, he exposed the delicate skin of her neck, where a faded mark should have lingered. She gasped sharply, her eyes locking onto his. There was no uncertainty in his stare, no hesitation, only absolute resolve. This wasn't a decision, it was fate. "You are mine," he rumbled, lowering his head. He didn't merely nip or mark, he claimed. His fangs elongated, sharper and deadlier than those of ordinary wolves. With deliberate precision, he sank them deep into the claiming spot, branding her, tying her body and soul to his for eternity. As his teeth broke her skin, the king's bond exploded within her. It wasn't pain, it was an overwhelming fire, both healing and ecstatic. The remnants of Peter's shattered bond disintegrated instantly. Adira screamed, a sound raw with pure, unbridled power. Her bones felt as though they were being remade, her blood transforming into molten gold. The ancient strength of the Lycan lineage surged into her, not as a gift, but as an awakening. Dormant power hidden in her bloodline for generations stirred to life. A wave of golden energy erupted outward, forcing the entire pack to shield their eyes from its brilliance. Michael lifted his head, his lips glistening with her blood. He licked the wound clean, sealing it with his tongue, and the mark healed immediately, leaving behind an intricate, glowing golden insignia, the mark of a queen. Tears still welled in Adira's eyes, but when she opened them, the frightened pale blue of the omega was gone. Instead, her irises shone a vivid sapphire, ringed with the same fiery gold that burned in his own. She was no longer Adira, the rejected. She was now Adira, the claimed. The clearing fell silent except for Peter's ragged, anguished sobs. He knelt there, staring at the golden mark on Adira's neck, his face etched with soul-shattering regret. The bond he'd once shared with her was obliterated, leaving behind a void so vast it consumed him entirely. For Adira, however, the world had transformed. Colors appeared sharper, scents more potent. She could detect Delilah's sour, acidic fear, Peter's acrid self-loathing, and beneath it all, the unmistakable scent of Michael, her mate. Standing tall, one hand resting against the king's chest, Adira embraced her new reality. The old world was gone, replaced by something far greater. He carried the scent of pine, ozone, and ancient stone, exuding an aura of absolute, unshakable power. The golden energy that now coursed through her veins felt like a comforting yet heavy presence. King Michael kept her close, his arm a possessive shield as he surveyed the stunned and prostrate pack. His gaze was icy, devoid of warmth or mercy. "The silver pelt pack," he declared, his voice flat and emotionless, "is in disgrace. You have insulted your goddess. You have allowed the desecration of a sacred bond. You have wronged your queen. The word queen struck the pack like a physical blow, sending another desperate wave of prostration rippling through the crowd. Alpha Borin, his face pressed into the dirt, pleaded, "Your Majesty, Queen Adira, forgive us. We did not know. It was my son." "It was," Michael confirmed, his tone lethal. He turned his piercing gaze to Peter, a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. Delilah, her mind finally unraveling, let out a hysterical laugh. "No, no, it's a trick. I'm the Luna. He chose me. She's an Omega. She's nothing." "Be silent," Adira said quietly. Her voice was not a shout, not a plea, but it carried the weight of the golden power now coursing through her veins, infused with the authority of the king. Delilah's shrieks cut off abruptly, as though an invisible hand had squeezed her throat shut. The entire pack flinched. Adira, the Omega, had commanded silence, and silence she received. Michael glanced down at her, a flicker of dark pride in his golden eyes. "There is nothing for you here," he said, his voice softer. "For her alone." Adira looked at the pack members who had scorned her, at her sister weeping silent, furious tears, and at Peter, the man who had once been her sun and stars. She felt nothing, only a cold, distant pity. He was pathetic, weak. The king was right. She turned her back on all of it, the clearing, her family, her entire life. Not a single pang of loss stirred within her. "Come," Michael commanded. He began walking toward the edge of the forest, and Adira, the once weak Omega, walked beside him. Her steps were steady, her head held high. As they moved, silent, black-clad Lycan warriors, the king's royal guard, emerged from the shadows, their golden eyes identical to his. They formed a silent, lethal perimeter around their king and his new queen. Adira took her first step out of the clearing, her hand resting lightly on her mate's arm, leaving her past behind to rot. She was heading to the Lycan King's court, a place steeped in treacherous, ancient power. She was terrified, but as she felt the steady, possessive thrum of the king's bond, she realized, for the first time in her life, she was not weak. The journey was a disorienting blur of motion. Adira was half carried, half led by Michael through a tear in the air, a shadow walk that bypassed the physical world. One moment she stood in the damp, familiar forest of the Silver Pelt Pack. The next, she found herself on polished black marble, so cold it seeped through the thin soles of her shoes. The Lycan court awaited, its oppressive grandeur pressing down on her like a tangible force. Towering obsidian columns spiraled upward into darkness, their surfaces edged with runes that glowed faintly with golden light. The air hummed with latent energy, each breath thick with the weight of centuries-old power. Around them, figures moved like wraiths, their movements fluid and unnervingly silent. Golden eyes watched from the shadows, assessing, calculating. Adira could feel their gazes boring into her, weighing her worthiness to stand beside their king. She straightened her spine, refusing to let her unease show. This was her new reality, and she would meet it head on. Michael guided her forward, his presence a constant anchor amidst the overwhelming strangeness of her surroundings. They passed through vast halls where whispers echoed like ghostly voices, recounting tales of battles fought and betrayals endured. The walls seemed alive, pulsing faintly with the same golden energy that now flowed through her veins. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of the bond she now shared with the man at her side. As they approached what appeared to be the heart of the court, a massive throne room came into view. At its center sat an enormous chair carved from what looked like solidified shadow, adorned with intricate patterns that shimmered when caught in the dim light. Around it, lesser thrones were arranged in a semicircle, occupied by individuals whose auras radiated power nearly equal to Michael's. These were the council members, the elite among the elite, guardians of the Lycan realm's most closely guarded secrets. Adira felt a surge of apprehension as they drew closer. She knew this moment would define her future, that these beings would judge her not only as Michael's chosen, but also as a potential queen worthy of their allegiance. Yet, despite her fear, she felt something else stirring within her, a quiet determination. She had walked away from everything she had ever known, embraced a bond that defied logic and tradition, and survived. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them, not as the weak Omega she had once been, but as someone stronger, fiercer, and unyielding. Michael halted before the council, his stance regal and commanding. "This is Adira," he announced, his voice resonating throughout the chamber. "She is my queen, bound to me by blood and power. Challenge her if you dare, but know this, any threat to her is a threat to me." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. For a moment there was silence, the kind that preceded storms. Then, one by one, the council members inclined their heads in acknowledgement. It was done. She was accepted, or at least tolerated, for now. As Michael led her away from the throne room, Adira allowed herself a small, private exhale. The road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but she was no longer alone. Together, they would navigate the treacherous waters of the Lycan court, forging a path that belonged solely to them. The Lycan King's court was not a fortress built atop a mountain, but rather one carved from the mountain's very heart. The ceilings stretched hundreds of feet overhead, disappearing into shadow, supported by immense unadorned pillars of black stone. Braziers burned with a cold blue flame, casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the vast hall, but offered little warmth. The air was dry and ancient, carrying the scent of dust, ozone, and the overwhelming territorial presence of powerful, unfamiliar lichens. If the Silver Pelt clearing had been a stage, this was a pantheon. Her simple linen dress, still stained with dirt and tears from earlier, felt like a beggar's rag among the opulence surrounding her. The lichens here were dark, rich velvets, furs, and leathers. They were all tall, beautiful, and terrifying, and every single one of them turned to stare at her as she entered. "His Majesty has returned," a voice called out, though it was unnecessary. Every lichen in the hall had already dropped into a deep, respectful bow. Michael did not slow his pace. His arms remained a possessive band of steel around her waist. He strode through the parting sea of powerful beings, his boots clicking sharply against the marble floor with authority. Adira was towed along in his wake, her heart hammering in her chest. This was a court of predators. For her entire life, she had been an Omega, the lowest of the low. Now she stood surrounded by beings who were to an Alpha what an Alpha was to her. She felt their eyes on her, a suffocating weight of suspicion pressing down. Their whispered thoughts buzzed faintly in her mind, sibilant and indistinct, a new and unsettling ability she could not yet decipher. She saw their gazes drop to the glowing golden mark on her neck before rising to her face with expressions of shock, confusion, and undisguised contempt. They smelled the Omega on her, the weakness of her former pack. A wolf, one woman hissed, her emerald eyes glinting like chips of ice. She is marked, another breathed, his hand instinctively moving to his chest in disbelief. They will learn, Michael growled softly, his voice a low rumble meant only for her ears. He seemed utterly unconcerned with their opinions. Not once did he acknowledge any of them. Instead, he continued walking, pulling her toward a massive throne-like chair carved from a single piece of obsidian. When they finally stopped, he turned to face the hall, positioning her in front of him while keeping her tucked securely against his chest, his chin resting protectively over her head. He was presenting her. A high-ranking, silver-haired male stepped forward, his expression carefully controlled yet curious. "Your Majesty, you were gone but a day. What is this? Who is this?" The question hung heavy in the air, sharp and dangerous. The entire court waited in tense silence. Michael's grip on her waist tightened imperceptibly, and she could feel the lethal possessiveness thrumming just beneath his skin, ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. King Michael looked down at the silver-haired Lycan, his gaze unwavering. "This is Adira," he declared, his voice resonating through the hall with commanding authority. "She bears my mark and stands under my protection." His words were met with murmurs rippling through the crowd, some disbelieving, others wary, but none dared challenge him outright. Michael's stance made it clear that any threat to her would be met with swift retribution. Adira felt the weight of their scrutiny even more acutely now, knowing she was being judged not just as an Omega, but as someone claimed by their king. Yet, despite the fear coursing through her veins, there was something steadying about Michael's presence. His strength was palpable, his dominance undeniable. Though she had always relied on invisibility to survive, here she was thrust into the spotlight, shielded only by his unyielding resolve. The silver-haired Lycan inclined his head slightly, though his eyes betrayed lingering skepticism. "Understood, Your Majesty, but such a claim, it is unprecedented." Michael's response was immediate and cutting. "Unprecedented does not mean impossible. My decision is final." With that, he dismissed further questioning, turning his attention back to Adira. He guided her to sit beside him on the dais, ensuring she remained within arm's reach. The message was clear. She was untouchable, her safety guaranteed by the most powerful being in the room. As the initial shock began to settle, subtle shifts occurred throughout the court. Some Lycans exchanged wary glances, others muttered amongst themselves, and a few even dared to approach cautiously, offering greetings or veiled congratulations. Each interaction was brief, their respect for Michael's authority evident in their measured tones and careful body language. Adira listened intently, absorbing everything, their words, their scents, their unspoken intentions. It was overwhelming, yet she found herself clinging to the details, using them as anchors to steady her fraying nerves. Despite the grandeur and danger of the court, Adira couldn't help but notice small things. The way the cold blue flames reflected off the polished marble floors. The faint scent of pine lingering on Michael's cloak. The rhythmic echo of footsteps as servants moved silently about their tasks. These observations grounded her, reminding her of the world beyond the suffocating weight of judgmental stares. Time passed slowly, each moment stretching longer than the last. Eventually, the initial flurry of curiosity subsided, leaving behind a tense but manageable calm. Michael remained vigilant, his protective stance never faltering. For the first time in her life, Adira felt something akin to safety, not because she believed the court accepted her, but because she trusted the man standing beside her. When the gathering finally dispersed, Michael led her away from the throne, guiding her through winding corridors until they reached quieter, more private quarters. Here, the air was warmer, the oppressive energy of the court fading into the background. Adira exhaled deeply, realizing only then how tightly she had been holding herself together. "You're safe now," Michael said quietly, his voice softer than it had been in the hall. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Michael studied her for a long moment, his piercing gaze searching hers. "Because no one else will. Because you deserve better than what you've known. And because I can." It wasn't a complete answer, but it was enough for now. Adira immediately recognized him as Lord Valerius, the king's chief advisor. His face was a map of aristocratic lines and cold intelligence. Michael spoke, his voice flat yet commanding. "This," he said, gesturing to Adira, "is my mate, your queen." A collective gasp rippled through the grand hall. Valerius's eyes widened as his gaze darted between the king's resolute expression and Adira's shimmering sapphire gold eyes. His attention lingered on her tattered dress and the streak of dirt smudged across her cheek. "My queen," he repeated, his tone carefully measured. "From where does she hail, my king? She smells." "She smells of her destiny," Michael interjected sharply, his voice dropping to an icy chill. "Which is now my destiny, and yours. You will all show her the respect she deserves." He turned slightly, preparing to dismiss them, but a young Lycan from the back, his face flushed with indignation, pushed forward. "But Majesty," he blurted, "she is a wolf, a pack omega, judging by the scent. She is unworthy." The word unworthy reverberated through the vast hall like a defiant bell. It was the same word Peter had once used. A tremor of fear, cold and sickening, coursed through Adira. Instinctively, she flinched, her newfound power wavering. She had underestimated the king's speed. In an instant, he moved like a black blur. No longer standing beside her, he appeared across the hall, his hand clenched around the young Lycan's throat, lifting him off the marble floor. The sound of choking filled the silence. "My king!" Valerius exclaimed, taking a step forward. Michael raised a hand, silencing him. He held the struggling Lycan at eye level, his golden eyes ablaze with a calm yet terrifying rage. "You," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft as the male clawed at his wrist, "have precisely 5 seconds to apologize to your queen. I suggest you use them." "I can't breathe," the Lycan choked out. "That is the point," Michael replied calmly. 4. "Please, Majesty." 3. I 2. Adira saw the raw, primal fear in the young Lycan's eyes and stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Michael, please," she implored softly. The king's head snapped toward her, his expression inscrutable as the male dangled helplessly from his grip. He was not a gentleman. He was territorial. He was lethal. And his mate had just been insulted. But she was also his mate, and she had made a request. With a final contemptuous snarl, Michael hurled the Lycan across the hall. The young man crashed into a stone pillar with a sickening crack before slumping to the floor, unconscious but alive. In 2 swift strides, Michael returned to Adira, his anger still radiating in waves. He grabbed her hand, pulling it to his chest. "No one," he growled, his golden eyes piercing into hers. "Will ever disrespect you again. That is my vow. My protection is absolute. Do you understand?" She nodded, breathless. She understood. He was complex, dominant, and undeniably frightening. Yet in that moment, she also felt something else, a strange sense of safety beneath the storm. In that moment, as the entire terrified court knelt before her, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt completely and utterly safe. The silver pelt pack was broken. The sun rose over the grand clearing, but it brought no warmth. Instead, it illuminated a scene of profound disgrace. The pack members, forced to witness their future alpha's humiliation and their omega's cataclysmic rise, were scattered, their faces pale with shock and fear. For Peter, however, there was no sun, only the void. He sat on the cold ground where Adira had been claimed. Her scent, now terrifyingly transformed into an aura of ozone and ancient power, lingered in his senses. Beneath it, though, was the phantom trace of their bond, the one he had torn, the one he had rejected. It left him with a gnawing emptiness, a black hole in his chest where his soul should have been. Rejecting her had not made him feel strong or free. Instead, he felt hollowed out, weak, and unbearably cold. He had severed his own connection to survive without it, but now he was bleeding internally. "Peter, Peter, get up!" Delilah's voice cut through the silence like nails scraping against raw nerves. He looked up at her. She stood over him, her once beautiful face twisted into an ugly snarl. Her dress was torn, her hair disheveled. "You're just going to sit there?" she snapped. "They're gone. She left. That creature took her, and you just let him?" "He is the Lycan King, Delilah," Peter croaked, his voice raw. Struggling to his feet, his body ached under the weight of the void inside him. The emptiness began to curdle into irritation, hot and sickening. "What would you have had me do? Challenge him?" "He insulted you," she shrieked. "He called you hollow-hearted." And Adira, Delilah faltered, unable to articulate the look of cold pity Adira had given her. "She's supposed to be nothing. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen." "She's the Lykan Queen," Peter whispered, the words tasting bitter. "Goddess, what have I done?" "Stop saying that." Delilah grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Who cares? I am your chosen Luna. The pack must respect me. We will fix this. We'll tell them she was enchanted, that the king was bewitched." Peter wrenched his arm from her grasp, staring at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The ambition he had once admired now seemed grotesque, a shallow, grasping envy that consumed her entirely. She hadn't even checked on him, only fretted about her own threatened status. His irritation turned to disgust. "Leave me alone, Delilah." "You are the future alpha," she hissed. "You will not walk away from me." He turned, the void in his chest a cold, dead weight. "I was a fool," he said, not to her, but to the empty air. "I rejected my destiny." With heavy, haunted steps, he began to walk away, leaving her alone in the clearing. But it didn't matter. He was already alone. He would be alone for the rest of his miserable, fated life. The Queen's new power days in the Lycan court blurred together in a haze of terrifying sensations. Adira resided in the king's personal chambers, an expansive suite where the walls seemed to hum with ancient energy. She wore silks and velvets in deep, regal hues that felt foreign against her skin. However, the most profound change was within her. The king's bond lived inside her, a constant warmth at the base of her spine, a golden hum connecting her to Michael. His emotions became hers, a surge of irritation during council meetings, a wave of satisfaction after passing judgment, or a possessive thrum whenever he drew near. Her senses were heightened. She could hear a spider skittering 100 yards away, detect deceit before words left someone's lips, and her strength had grown exponentially. She'd shattered a solid oak table when startled by a servant. Yet this newfound power was raw and frightening. Though she bore the title of queen, she felt like a child clutching a blade far too sharp for her hands. That night, she was alone, pacing the cold marble floor of her chambers. Michael remained locked in council, addressing the political fallout from his return. Restless, Adira stepped onto the balcony, a precarious ledge carved into the mountainside. The wind howled, whipping her hair around her face, but she felt no chill. She sensed him before seeing him, not his footsteps, but the sudden tug of the bond, a silken thread pulling at her core. Michael appeared, shrugging off his heavy fur-lined cloak. 6 hours in council had left him weary, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "You should be sleeping," he said, his tone quiet, almost gentle. "I can't," Adira admitted, turning to face him. "It's all too loud." He nodded, understanding. Moving to stand beside her, his presence shielded her from the roaring wind. "The bond is settling," he explained. "It awakens your bloodline. The Omegas of the Silver Pelt Pack were not always so docile. Your ancestors were formidable." "I don't feel strong," she whispered, staring at her trembling hands. "I feel breakable." For a moment, he was silent. Then, surprising her, he reached out, not as the commanding king, but with unexpected tenderness. His larger, warmer hand enveloped hers. "You are not breakable," he murmured, his voice low and steady. Lifting her hand, he turned it over, tracing the lines on her palm. The simple touch sent a jolt of heat coursing through her. His golden eyes met hers, the weariness replaced by a familiar, smoldering intensity. In that gaze, Adira saw both danger and solace. For the first time since their connection began, she wondered if this bond might forge something stronger than either of them had anticipated. His gaze dropped to her mouth. "You are not an Omega," he growled. "You are not weak. You are mine." He tugged her hand, pulling her closer, and Adira's heart hammered, not with fear, but with a new wild anticipation. She was finally beginning to understand him. Delilah stared at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror. The Silverpelt Alpha House was supposed to be a palace. It was a glorified log cabin. She was supposed to be a Luna, adored and envied. Instead, she was a pariah. Her life was a nightmare. The pack, terrified of the Lycan King's wrath, treated her with a cold, fearful disdain. They blamed her. They whispered that her ambition had brought disgrace to them all. Alphabor, Peter's father, had confined them both to the pack house, his face a constant mask of cold fury. And Peter was the worst. He was a ghost. He barely spoke. He spent his days brooding, his eyes lost in the void, as he called it. He wouldn't touch her. He looked at her with a disgust that made her want to scream. This was not the future she had plotted for. This was not the power she had been promised. "A message!" a young pack warrior shouted from outside. "A message from the Blackwood pack!" Delilah ran to the main hall. A traveling beta was handing a scroll to Alpha Boren. "What is it?" she demanded. Boren ignored her, breaking the wax seal. His eyes scanned the parchment. His face, already grim, turned ashen. He staggered back, dropping the scroll as if it had burned him. "What?" Delilah snapped, snatching it from the floor. She read the words. It was a formal decree sent to all packs, announcing the king's new mate, announcing the coronation, and "We celebrate the ascension of his fated Adira of the Silver Pelt Pack to her rightful place as Lycan Queen." The word was a physical blow. Not just a mate, not just a consort, queen ruling over all packs, ruling over her. Delilah's vision went red. A choking, poisonous rage filled her throat. Adira, weak, pathetic, sniveling little Adira, who she had walked over her entire life, was now the most powerful female on the continent. She, Delilah, was trapped in this wretched, broken pack, tied to a useless, broken alpha, while her sister was being crowned. "No," Delilah whispered, her voice shaking with a terrifying, cold fury. "No, I will not allow it." Peter, drawn by the commotion, entered the room. "What's wrong now, Delilah?" he asked, his voice dead. Delilah looked at him, her mind working. A new, vicious, and desperate plan forming. The king was powerful, yes, but he was also a male. And males, even kings, were fools. They were easily manipulated by whispers, by suggestions of betrayal. Peter had been. Perhaps Michael could be too. "Nothing," Delilah said, her voice suddenly sweet, a chilling contrast to the murder in her eyes. "Nothing at all, my love." "I was just thinking," Adira said, her voice soft but edged with tension. "Adira was always so loyal to you." Peter turned to her, confusion knitting his brow, but Delilah only smiled, a slow, toxic curve of her lips. If she couldn't have the power, she would destroy the one who did. She would frame her sister. She would burn Adira's new world to the ground. The roaring wind of the balcony seemed distant now, replaced by the heavy, suffocating silence of the king's chambers. Michael hadn't released her hand. He led her back inside to a sprawling map of the territories etched into a massive stone table. The room was dimly lit by the low blue flames of the hearth, casting their faces in stark contrasts of shadow and light. The intimacy of the moment hung fragile and dangerous, more potent than any public display of power. "The court saw your strength tonight," Michael said, his voice a low rumble. He finally let go of her hand, tapping a finger on the map over the lands bordering the Silverpelt territory. "When you stopped me from killing that fool." Adira cut him off quickly, her old Omega instincts flaring. "I didn't mean to undermine you," she stammered. "You didn't," he interrupted, his golden eyes intense. "You showed mercy, something this court hasn't seen in centuries. They are afraid of me," he stated matter-of-factly. "But fear is a blunt tool. What you did inspires loyalty. That is the mark of a queen." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But it is also a vulnerability." Adira frowned. "What do you mean?" "This court," he gestured across the room, "is a nest of vipers. They have served me for centuries out of fear. Now you are here, my fated, my queen. You possess a power they cannot understand, and they will test it. They will see your mercy as weakness. They will see your kindness as a flaw to exploit." He stepped closer, his towering frame seeming to absorb the firelight. Your greatest test will not come from an enemy shouting at the gates. It will come from a whisper in the halls, from someone who smiles at you, who offers comfort, who claims to be your friend. A cold premonition slithered down her spine. You're trying to scare me. I am trying to prepare you, he corrected, his voice sharp. You are no longer a pack omega. You cannot afford to trust blindly, especially, he added, his tone dropping, with those from your past. Envy is a poison, and your sister holds a full cup. The sudden mention of Delilah made Adira flinch. Before she could process his warning, he cupped her chin, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. The analytical cold king vanished, replaced by the raw, possessive mate. I will not let them harm you, he growled, but you must learn to see the daggers before they reach your throat. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The political lesson was over. He lowered his head, and Adira's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering shut. She felt the gentle brush of his lips, a fleeting promise of fire, and an affirmation of their bond. For the first time, she was ready to embrace it fully. But before their lips could truly meet, a sharp, insistent knock shattered the quiet of the chamber door. Michael's head jerked up, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. "Enter," he commanded. Lord Valerius swept into the room, his face etched with grim urgency. He bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, my apologies for the intrusion. An urgent message has arrived from the Silverpelt Pack. It concerns the Queen." Delilah had written the letter herself, her hand steady and her mind clear for the first time in weeks. She hadn't penned it as herself, but instead crafted it from the perspective of a loyal yet terrified Silverpelt warrior, one who claimed to have uncovered a terrible truth. The letter brimmed with language of devotion, fear for the king's safety, and the burden of a guilty conscience. She accused Adira of being a spy, her rejection by Peter a ruse designed to infiltrate the Lycan court. Delilah alleged that Adira remained loyal to her true mate, Peter, meeting him secretly. She claimed Adira's newfound power wasn't derived from the king's bond, but rather from dark magic, part of a plot to sever the connection and assassinate Michael, placing Peter on the throne. It was a masterpiece of paranoia. Delilah had entrusted the missive to a beta traveler, along with her last remaining silver jewelry, to ensure swift and anonymous delivery. Now she waited. The trap was set. In the Lycan court, Lord Valerius held the cheap parchment as though it were venomous. Standing before his king, who had moved protectively in front of Adira like an immovable wall of fury, Valerius spoke carefully. "It arrived with the trade caravan, Majesty," he said, his voice strained. Michael extended his hand without a word, commanding silence. Valerius hesitated briefly before handing over the letter. Adira gripped her hands tightly together, the king's earlier warnings about whispers echoing in her ears. As Valerius began reading aloud, his aristocratic features twisted with disgust. "She is not what she seems, Your Majesty. Her rejection was a lie, a performance to gain your sympathy. Her bond with Alpha Peter remains unbroken. Together, they conspire against you. She is a serpent, poised to bring about your downfall." Valerius faltered, unable to continue. The silence that followed was oppressive, heavy with tension. Adira felt the blood drain from her face. The accusations were unmistakably Delilah's work, the same calculated tactic used to isolate her, to cast doubt and make her appear treacherous. It had worked once before, on Peter. Her fragile confidence began to crumble. "Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Michael did not look at her. Instead, he held out his hand to Valerius. "Give it to me." Taking the parchment, his golden eyes scanned the words, his expression rigid and unreadable. He read it once, then again. Adira's heart pounded so fiercely she feared it might break her ribs. This was the moment of reckoning. This was the dagger he had warned her about. She could feel the weight of his suspicion, his doubt pressing coldly against their bond. He had called her merciful, he had called her strong, but he was also a king, an ancient, ruthless ruler who had been warned of vipers. And now a perfectly crafted lie had slithered into his nest. Slowly, deliberately, he refolded the parchment and turned to face her. His golden eyes found hers, but they were not warm. They were not the eyes of her mate. They were the cold, assessing gaze of the Lycan King. "He believes it," she thought, a cold wave of despair washing over her. Just like Peter, he believes it. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating, as if it were alive. Adira's legs felt weak beneath her. She had been ripped from her home, thrust into a world of predators, and now the one person who was supposed to be her anchor, her protector, looked at her as though she were a stranger. "Michael," she tried again, her voice stronger this time, desperate. "You know me. You feel the bond. You know that isn't true." "What I know," Michael said, his voice low and dangerous, "is that for 18 years you were loyal to another male, a male you believed was your destiny." He turned away from her, pacing toward the hearth. "What I know is that your sister is consumed by an envy that would burn the world to ash. She is capable of this lie." "Then you believe me?" Adira cried, relief surging through her so strongly it made her dizzy. "But I also know," he continued, turning back with a face hardened by cold calculation, "that a lie is only dangerous if it is allowed to fester." He held up the parchment. "This traitor's whisper was not delivered solely to me. It reached Valerius. By now, the entire court knows its contents." Adira's stomach sank. She understood. The whispers she'd heard when she first arrived, Omega, weak, wolf, would now be replaced by something far worse. Traitor. "They are already suspicious of you," Michael stated flatly, confirming her fears. "You are an outsider, a wolf, an Omega who became a queen. They want to believe this. They want you to be a usurper. It makes their world make sense again." "So what do we do?" Adira asked, her newfound regal bearing crumbling under the weight of fear. She felt like the 18-year-old Omega again, trapped, powerless. "How do I fight this? You can't just execute me." "No," Michael agreed, his expression unreadable. "I cannot." He glanced past her at Lord Valerius, who watched him with hawk-like intensity, waiting for a command. "The accusation has been made public, therefore the proof of its falsehood must also be public." A new dread settled over Adira. This wasn't a private matter between mates anymore. This was a political trial. "They believe you are a spy for the Silverpelt Pack," Michael said, his voice devoid of emotion. "They believe your heart belongs to your former mate. They believe your sister is your accomplice." "She's no accomplice," Adira burst out. "She's the one who wrote this." "Perhaps," Michael said, his tone indifferent. Adira stood frozen, her gaze locked onto the three figures who had just entered the amphitheater. Alpha Borin, his son Peter, and the Lady Delilah stepped forward, their expressions a mix of defiance and unease. The crowd murmured like a restless tide as they took their places opposite Adira, creating an invisible line of tension that crackled in the cold air. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, dissecting, judging, waiting for her to falter. Michael's voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding, demanding order. His words echoed across the stone arena, reverberating with authority. "This trial will determine the truth," he declared, his tone devoid of warmth or mercy. "Let no one doubt that justice will be served here today." Adira's breath hitched as she forced herself to stand straighter. The gown she wore felt heavier with each passing moment, its rich fabric suffocating rather than regal. She wanted to scream at Michael to demand what game he was playing, but she knew better. In this space, in front of these people, there was no room for weakness. She clenched her fists beneath the folds of her sleeves, grounding herself. Peter spoke first, his voice laced with venom. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing low but unable to mask the disdain in his eyes. "We have come to expose the truth about your so-called mate. An Omega unworthy of our king, whose loyalty is questionable at best." He gestured toward Delilah, who stepped forward with practiced grace, her golden hair catching the light. Delilah's smile was sweet, almost innocent, but her words were anything but. "I witnessed her betrayal myself," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly over the gathered crowd. "She conspired against you, Your Majesty, seeking to undermine your rule. Her treachery runs deep, rooted in deceit and ambition." The accusations landed like stones, each one chipping away at Adira's resolve. She wanted to refute them, to defend herself, but Michael's earlier command still rang in her ears: "You will not testify." So instead, she remained silent, her jaw tight, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Every accusation felt like another layer of isolation pressing down on her. Alpha Boran added his own condemnation, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Our pack has always been loyal to the crown," he stated firmly. "But we cannot ignore such blatant threats to our stability. If this Omega remains by your side, it will weaken us all." The crowd erupted into murmurs, some nodding in agreement, while others whispered conspiratorially. Adira scanned the faces around her, searching for any sign of support, but found none. Even those who might have once sympathized with her now seemed wary, unwilling to risk drawing attention to themselves. Then came Valerius, stepping forward to present evidence, documents, testimonies, and even witnesses who claimed to have seen Adira's supposed acts of betrayal. Each piece of evidence felt like a blade twisting deeper into her soul. Some of the accounts were outright lies, while others were twisted truths taken out of context. Yet, under the unyielding scrutiny of the court, they painted a damning picture. Throughout it all, Michael remained impassive, his expression unreadable. He listened intently, never once looking at Adira, never offering reassurance or doubt. To the world, he appeared as the impartial judge, weighing the scales of justice without bias. But to Adira, his silence was deafening, a chasm between them that grew wider with every passing moment. Finally, after hours of testimony, the court fell silent. All eyes turned to Michael, awaiting his verdict. The tension was palpable, a storm ready to break. Adira braced herself, unsure whether she should hope for salvation or prepare for condemnation. When Michael rose from his throne, the movement sent a ripple through the crowd. His presence dominated the space, ancient and unyielding. He descended the steps slowly, deliberately, until he stood before Adira. For the first time since the trial began, he looked at her directly, his golden eyes piercing through her defenses. "You stand accused of crimes that could unravel my reign," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Yet I see no guilt in your eyes, no shadow of deception mars your soul." He turned then, addressing the court. "What has been presented here today is not proof of betrayal, but proof of baseless hatred and fear. Fear of change, fear of unity, fear of something greater than yourselves." His words ignited outrage among the nobles, their voices rising in protest. But Michael silenced them with a single raised hand, his power absolute. "Enough," he commanded, his voice thunderous. "This trial ends now. My mate is innocent, and any who question her loyalty henceforth will answer to me." Relief crashed over Adira like a wave, leaving her trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as Michael reached for her hand, his touch warm and familiar once more. In that moment, he was no longer the distant king, he was hers again. Together, they faced the court, united against the tide of opposition. Though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, Adira knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone, and neither was Michael. To the side, looking small and pathetic under the weight of the court's power, stood what was left of her past. Alpha Borin, his face gray and haggard. Peter, who looked like a walking corpse with hollow eyes that revealed the void within him. And Delilah, dressed in her finest, a defiant, slightly tattered green dress. When she saw Adira, Delilah didn't appear afraid or cowed. Instead, a slow, venomous smirk spread across her face, one brimming with triumph. She truly believed she had succeeded, that she had ensnared the king and queen, and would soon be vindicated. The trial began as Michael's voice boomed, striking the stone walls and echoing through the arena. His golden eyes, cold and distant as the moon, finally settled on her. "Queen Adira stands accused of treason," he declared, "of conspiring with her former pack to assassinate the king. We will hear the evidence, bring forth the accuser." There was a complication just as the trial was set to proceed. Valerius leaned toward the throne, his voice low. "Your Majesty, the anonymous letter stated that the treasonous meetings took place on Silverpelt land. The accusers claim the only fair trial is one held on the land where the alleged crime occurred." Adira's head snapped up. She watched Delilah whisper frantically to Peter, who relayed the message to his father, who nodded. It was a ploy. "They believe you will not leave your fortress," Valerius murmured. "They think this is a way to stall, to accuse the trial of being unfair." The dangerous silence descended over the room. Michael's eyes narrowed, fixed on the small, defiant cluster of Silverpelt wolves. Delilah still wore her smirk, certain she had found a loophole. "They are mistaken," Michael said, his voice a low, deadly promise. He rose from his throne, towering and terrifying. The entire amphitheater gasped. "The trial will not be held here." He pointed a single black-gloved finger at the Silverpelt delegation. "This began in their clearing. It will end in their clearing. We ride for the Silverpelt pack now." The journey was tense and agonizing, a blur of anticipation and dread. Adira rode beside the king, flanked by his imperial guard. They were no longer mates, but judge and prisoner. The silver pelt trio traveled under heavy escort, their faces a mix of confusion and, in Delilah's case, growing confidence. She believed the king's dramatic move signaled uncertainty, a gesture to appease the other packs by appearing fair. When they burst through the shadow fold into the grand clearing, Adira's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly as she had left it, yet somehow smaller. The entire silver pelt pack had been assembled, forced there by the king's advance guard. They knelt, faces pressed to the dirt, trembling in terror. It was the same ground, the same moon, a pale crescent hanging in the sky, and the same audience, but she was different. Michael dismounted, his black cloak sweeping behind him. He moved to the exact center of the clearing, the same spot where Peter had once rejected her and where Michael had claimed her. The ground seemed to hum with residual power, a permanent echo of their combined influence. "Here," he declared, his voice resonating over the terrified pack, "we will have the truth." Turning to the guard, his tone hardened like cracking ice. "Bring the accuser and bring the accused." Adira was ushered forward, her heart pounding wildly. She stood on one side of the king, while Delilah was pushed forward by a guard. Stumbling but catching herself, Delilah's eyes burned with false indignation. "I am no accuser," she cried, playing her part. "I am a victim. We all are, of her." She pointed a trembling, dramatic finger at Adira. "She has bewitched him. She is a traitor." Adira met her sister's gaze, her fear replaced by a cold, mounting fury. This would not be a repeat performance. "And where," Michael said, his voice deceptively calm, "is your proof?" "It is in the letter," Delilah stammered, her plan faltering under scrutiny. "The anonymous letter?" "The one you wrote?" Michael asked, his tone silken yet dangerous. Delilah's face went white. "What? No, I would never." "Then," the king said, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face, "you will not mind that I have brought another witness." He turned his gaze to the edge of the clearing. "The beta traveler you paid with your mother's silver." "Bring him forward." Two of the king's imperial guard marched the beta traveler into the center of the clearing. He was a thin, nervous-looking wolf, his eyes wide with terror as he found himself the focus of attention. Delilah's face drained of color. She shot a panicked look at Peter, but he was lost in his own thoughts, staring at the ground. I don't know who that is," Delilah shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is a trick, a new lie. She has bewitched him, just as she bewitched you, Your Majesty." She turned to Michael, her hands clasped in a desperate plea. "My king, you are a just ruler. You must see the truth. I saw it. I saw them meeting in secret near the old river." Peter was torn. He still felt the pull of their old bond. And she used it. She promised him power. She promised him your throne. Adira stood silent, her face pale, but her expression cold. She watched her sister weave her tapestry of lies, each word more frantic than the last. Delilah's performance was masterful. She wept, accused, pleaded, painting a vivid picture of a treacherous Omega, hopelessly in love with her first mate, manipulating a grieving Alpha and a trusting king. The silver pelt pack was captivated. Whispers began again, lending credence to Delilah's claims. It made a twisted kind of sense. Why else would the king take her? She must have enchanted him. Delilah, sensing she was swaying the crowd, grew bolder. "She is a spy!" she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Adira. She is a traitor to her own pack and a serpent in your bed. I tried to warn you. This anonymous letter, it was the only way. I was afraid for my life. Afraid of her? She finished, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a tragic heroine. She had played her final desperate card. The clearing was silent, the tension so thick it was a physical weight. Every eye, Lycan and Wolf, turned to the king, waiting for his judgment. Michael remained still for a long, agonizing moment, his face a mask of stone. He let the accusation hang in the air, letting its poison spread. Adira's heart hammered, a cold dread creeping into her. He had to believe her. Finally, the king turned his cold golden eyes, not to Delilah, not to the beta, but to Adira. You have heard the accusation. His voice boomed, devoid of all warmth. What say you, Queen Adira? Adira looked at her sister, at the pack that had scorned her, and at the man she once loved. Then she looked at her king. She stepped forward, her regal blue gown sweeping the dirt. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the whisper of an omega. It was the clear, cold, and resonant voice of a queen. I say she lies. Delilah let out a sharp, theatrical scoff. Of course you deny it. Where is your proof, sister? I do not need to provide it, Adira said, her gaze steady. She is correct, Michael's voice cut through the air. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on a now faltering Delilah. Because you already have. He turned to the trembling beta traveler. Tell this assembly what you told my guard when they found you on the road. Tell them who gave you the letter. The beta, trapped in the king's golden gaze, fell to his knees. It was her, he stammered, pointing a shaky finger at Delilah. The lady Delilah. She gave me a silver necklace, said it was her mother's, and a bag of coin. She told me to get the letter to the Lycan court to make sure I said it was from a loyal warrior. Delilah reeled back as if struck. He's lying. He's with her. It's a conspiracy. She got to him. Silence, Michael roared. The force of his command was a physical blow, knocking Delilah off her feet and onto the hard-packed earth. You accuse your queen of meeting her former maid in secret by the old river? A bold claim, one that would require witnesses. I am the witness, Delilah cried from the ground. Are you? Michael asked, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this because it is a fascinating accusation, especially since for the entire time since my queen and I left this territory, your chosen mate, Alpha Peter, has been under the constant invisible surveillance of my imperial guard. Peter's hollow eyes snapped up. Alphabor gasped, his face turning ashen. He has not left the pack house in 3 weeks, Michael continued, his voice a casual, deadly purr. He has not spoken to anyone in secret. Delilah scrambled to her feet, her composure cracking. This is madness, lies upon lies. Her voice trembled, desperation seeping through every word. You can't trust him. He's bewitched by her. Michael's expression hardened further, his patience evaporating like mist under the sun. Enough, he said, his tone slicing through the air like a blade. Your accusations are baseless and reckless. Worse yet, they betray your true nature, your jealousy, your hunger for power, your willingness to destroy others to seize it. He turned away from her, addressing the crowd now. "This assembly is dismissed. Take her to the dungeons. We will decide her fate tomorrow." Gasps rippled through the gathered wolves as guards moved swiftly to restrain Delilah. She fought them briefly, clawing and spitting curses, but her strength waned quickly, leaving her limp and defeated. As she was dragged away, her cries echoed hauntingly across the clearing. The rest of the pack began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, their whispers carrying fragments of disbelief, anger, and relief. Some cast wary glances at Adira, while others avoided her gaze altogether. Michael approached Adira, his presence both commanding and reassuring. "Are you unharmed?" he asked softly, his golden eyes searching hers. Adira nodded, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I am," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm within her. "But I fear this is not over." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm yet gentle. "No, it isn't, but we will face whatever comes next, together." His words carried a weight that settled deep within her, anchoring her against the chaos threatening to overwhelm her. Later that evening, Adira stood alone on the balcony of their chambers, staring out at the moonlit forest. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that followed great upheaval. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that crept into her bones. Behind her, Michael emerged silently, joining her without a word. For a moment, they simply stood there, sharing the stillness. "Do you think she acted alone?" Adira asked finally, breaking the silence. Michael exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cool night air. "No," he admitted. "There are threads here we have yet to unravel, but tonight, let us focus on what remains intact: the truth, our bond, and the loyalty of those who truly stand with us." Adira turned to look at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. In that moment, she realized how much she had doubted, not just herself, but also the strength of their connection. Yet here he was, unwavering even after everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael tilted his head, questioning. "For believing me," she clarified, "for standing with me." A small, rare smile touched his lips. "Always," he said simply. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Adira allowed herself to believe him. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Adira felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she no longer walked it alone. Together, they would confront the shadows lurking in the corners of their world and bring light to the darkness. "He has spent his days, as my guard's report states, wallowing in a state of profound and pathetic self-pity. He hasn't met with anyone, especially not my queen." The truth struck like a guillotine blade, cutting through the tension in the air. The entire pack stared, frozen in shock. Delilah's plot wasn't just a lie, it was an impossible one. Michael turned to Adira, and for the first time in days, the cold, judicial mask slipped. His golden eyes burned with fierce, possessive pride. He hadn't believed the lie for a second. Instead, he had built the stage to watch his enemy unravel herself. Delilah began to sob, emitting dry, broken animal sounds. No, it was supposed to work. It worked on Peter. It was supposed to work on you." Her confession hung heavy in the air. The clearing fell into horrified silence as she confirmed her own treason. The trap had never been for Adira. It had always been for Delilah, and she had walked straight into it. The words echoed in the stunned stillness, louder than any roar. Peter stared at Delilah, the pathetic weeping figure crumpled on the ground. It was true, all of it. He hadn't just been a fool, he had been a tool, a weak, arrogant pawn easily manipulated by her desperate, jealous schemes. The rejection, the humiliation of his fated, the loss of his soul, it had all been part of her game. The cold void in his chest flared hot, not with anger, but with a searing, bottomless self-disgust. He had let this poison convince him that his destiny was unworthy. "Peter," Delilah whispered, her voice shattered. She crawled toward him, hands outstretched like a beggar. "Peter, please tell them you love me, not her. Tell them you chose me, please." He recoiled from her touch as if she were diseased. He looked at her, truly looked, and the beautiful, popular woman he once admired was gone. In her place was a sniveling, treacherous stranger, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with madness he now found repulsive. When he finally spoke, his voice was lifeless. "You," he said, the word dripping with venom that shocked even himself. "You are a plague." Delilah froze, her hand hovering midair. "You used me," Peter continued, his voice rising, gaining bitter strength. "You poisoned me against my fated. You helped me destroy my own soul. For this? For the chance to be Luna of a broken pack? And when that wasn't enough, you tried to destroy her again?" His gaze shifted past Delilah, landing on Adira. She stood beside the king, exuding a new cold power. Her sapphire and gold eyes watched him with pity, a pity far worse than hatred. In that moment, Peter saw everything he had thrown away. He saw the strength he had dismissed as weakness, the honor he had deemed unsuitable, the queen he had rejected. He took a deliberate step back from Delilah, severing the last invisible thread between them. "I want nothing to do with you," he spat. "You are no Luna of mine. You are nothing to this pack. You are nothing to me." The words rang out, a final public rejection, an echo of the one that had started it all. Delilah let out a choked sound as her last hope crumbled. Peter didn't care. He turned his full attention to Adira, doing the only thing left for him to do. He dropped to his knees, bowing his head in the dirt before the woman he had cast aside. "My queen," he choked out, the words tearing his throat raw. I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant. I rejected my destiny. I am sorry. I will live with that forever." All eyes were on Adira, her pack, her king, her broken former mate, and her hysterical, defeated sister waited for her judgment. Delilah, seeing Peter's final betrayal, let out a wail of complete and utter despair. She was alone. She scrambled across the dirt, her nails digging into the ground like a desperate animal. She grabbed the hem of Adira's midnight blue gown, her grip frantic. "Adira, Addie, please," she sobbed, her beautiful face now a grotesque mask of snot and tears. "Please, you're my sister. You have to forgive me. I didn't know. I was jealous. I was just so jealous. Please." The proud, popular Delilah, who had once smirked over Peter's shoulder, was now a groveling, broken creature at Adira's feet. The entire Silver Pelt pack watched, witnessing the final, absolute reversal of power. Adira looked down at her sister. She felt the cold wind of the clearing, the same wind that had chilled her on the night of her rejection. She remembered the physical, soul-splitting pain. She looked at Delilah's clawing, desperate hands clutching her dress. Then she looked at Michael. He was watching her, his golden eyes intense, his expression unreadable. He was not interfering. This was her justice to pass. Slowly, deliberately, Adira reached down. Delilah's eyes lit with a wild, desperate hope. But Adira didn't take her hand. She simply unhooked Delilah's fingers from the velvet one by one and took a single step back, breaking the contact. "No," Adira said. Her voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, cold, and final, carrying the ancient authority of the Lycan lineage. "You are not my sister," she said, her voice clear in the silence. "You are a lesson." She turned from Delilah's crumpled form. She looked at Peter, still kneeling, his head bowed in shame. He was a ghost, a living monument to his own arrogance. He would be alpha of this disgraced pack, forever bound to his mistake, forever living in the void he had carved. That was a sentence more profound than any she could pass. She had faced her tormentors. She had seen their lies exposed. She had watched them break each other, and she was finally free. Adira turned her back on her sister's broken sobs and her former mate's hollow regret. She turned her back on the silver pelt pack and the small, sad life she had once been forced to live. She walked across the clearing, her steps steady, her head held high. She came to a halt in front of Michael, the King of Kings, her destined mate. He extended his hand, and she accepted it, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. As their hands connected, the strength of their bond surged to life, enveloping them both in a radiant golden aura. The luminous glow pulsed around them, like a quiet vow of the future they would build together. Michael gazed down at her, his stern and regal features softening into an expression of raw, unyielding pride. His voice carried across the clearing, rich and resonant, as he spoke the words meant for all to hear. "My queen," he declared with unwavering certainty. With a gentle tug, he drew her closer to his side. Together, they pivoted to face the assembly, whose stunned silence filled the air like a palpable force. Adira, once cast aside and dismissed as the rejected Omega, was no longer that person. She now stood transformed, Adira, the Lycan Queen, her spirit tempered by the fires of betrayal, her latent power awakened by the hand of destiny itself. Her fate was sealed, bound irrevocably to the man who now claimed her as his equal and partner. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on the gathering, the energy in the clearing crackling with unspoken emotions. Every pair of eyes bore witness to the undeniable truth before them. This was no ordinary union. It was the joining of two souls destined to lead, their connection forged not merely out of love, but through trials that had reshaped them both. Adira's journey had been one of pain and resilience, her identity stripped bare only to be rebuilt stronger and more resolute. Now, standing beside Michael, she exuded a quiet confidence that demanded respect and awe. Michael's grip on her hand tightened ever so slightly, a subtle reassurance that he would never let her go. His presence radiated authority, yet there was an undercurrent of something softer, something undeniably protective in the way he regarded her. To him, she was not just his queen, she was his partner, his anchor, and the other half of his soul. The bond between them was visible not only in the shimmering aura that surrounded them, but also in the way their bodies instinctively aligned, as if drawn together by forces beyond their control. The crowd remained frozen, their collective breath held as they absorbed the significance of the scene unfolding before them. For years, many had doubted Adira's worth, dismissing her as weak or unworthy of such a position. Yet here she stood, her transformation complete, her inner strength undeniable. The scars of her past had not diminished her. Instead, they had sharpened her resolve and deepened her understanding of what it meant to endure, to rise above, and to claim one's rightful place. As the initial shock began to ebb, murmurs rippled through the clearing, whispers of disbelief giving way to reluctant admiration. Some bowed their heads in deference, while others simply stared, unable to reconcile the woman they had once underestimated with the commanding figure before them. Adira met each gaze steadily, her own eyes reflecting a mixture of triumph and grace. There was no malice in her expression, no desire for vengeance against those who had wronged her. Instead, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had already conquered their doubts and fears. Beside her, Michael seemed to swell with pride, his broad shoulders squared and his chin lifted slightly higher. He did not need to speak further. His actions said everything. By publicly claiming Adira as his queen, he had made a statement that transcended words. It was a declaration of loyalty, of unity, and of the unbreakable bond they shared. No one could deny the authenticity of their connection, nor the power it wielded. Together, they embodied strength, resilience, and a shared vision for the future. The golden aura that encased them continued to pulse softly, a living testament to the depth of their bond. It was a rare phenomenon, one that few had ever witnessed, and even fewer could explain. But its meaning was clear to all who saw it. This was a pairing sanctioned by fate itself. Adira and Michael were not merely king and queen. They were two halves of a whole, united in purpose and driven by a shared destiny. As the moment stretched on, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The tension that had gripped the clearing began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of anticipation. What lay ahead for the newly crowned queen and her king? Their journey was far from over, and challenges undoubtedly awaited them. But none could doubt that they would face whatever came next together, their bond serving as both shield and sword. Adira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her new roles settle over her shoulders. It was a responsibility she had never sought, but one she now embraced fully. Beside her, Michael gave her hand another reassuring squeeze, grounding her in the present. She glanced up at him, meeting his gaze, and found in his eyes the same fierce determination that burned within her own heart. They were ready, not just to rule, but to lead, to inspire, and to forge a new path forward. The clearing remained silent for a moment longer before a single voice broke through the stillness. "Long live the king and queen," it called out, hesitant yet sincere. One by one, others joined in, their voices swelling into a chorus of acknowledgement and respect. Adira felt a surge of gratitude wash over her, tempered by the knowledge that earning their trust would take time. But she was willing to wait, willing to prove herself not just as a queen, but as a leader worthy of their loyalty. Together, Adira and Michael turned and began to walk away from the crowd, their steps steady and synchronized. Behind them, the golden aura faded gradually, leaving behind only the memory of its brilliance. Yet, its absence did nothing to diminish the impact of what had transpired. In that moment, two individuals had become something greater than themselves, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unyielding power of destiny. And as they disappeared from view, the clearing erupted into a flurry of whispered conversations, each one a testament to the change that had begun.